Bev Kadish is an occupational therapist with many years' experience in supporting children and adults with Fragile X syndrome, both through her own private practice, WriteStart OT, and with the Fragile X Alliance Clinic in Melbourne. Heightened and dysregulated sensory sensitivity is very common for children and adults who have Fragile X syndrome. And in this webinar, Bev will discuss how sensory processing disorders can affect individuals and present sensory diets as a strategy to help support a person who has Fragile X syndrome. We warmly welcome Bev. Thank you, Bev.
Hello, everybody. It's great to have so many of you joining us tonight. I know I have spoken to quite a few Fragile X parents during the week, and there are quite a lot of therapists online, so welcome. And I am here to support you. If anybody needs help afterwards, send me an email. I'm going to also give you my email address to contact me to make an appointment if you require help to create a sensory diet. But I hope tonight gives both parents, therapists, and anybody else who supports individuals with Fragile X some idea of what a sensory diet can do for your individual and how to create one. And I think for parents and other caregivers, it's great as a starting point to ask your OT to create the sensory diet, having some idea of the things that you could incorporate into that diet. I'm going to start with the slide presentation. So tonight, as you know, is about sensory diets and Fragile X syndrome. And I think in order to understand how to create a sensory diet and what it's about, we need to just delve a little bit into what sensory processing actually is. So sensory processing is the body's way of organizing sensations from your own body and from the environment to make it possible to use the body effectively within the environment. It's the body's ability to receive or take in sensory information, interpret those stimuli, process them into a response by using past experience and ideas that you think may work in that situation, and then to adaptively respond to that stimulus. When I talk about the senses, I've mentioned that we're using stimuli from the environment and some from inside our own body. We have the usual five, the known senses of smell, sight, hearing, taste, and touch. And then we have what we call the hidden senses of proprioception, which is a body's awareness of where it is in space. The vestibular sense, which is very closely linked with proprioception, which is the body's movement in space. And then interoception, which really looks at our organs and things like knowing when you need the toilet because your bladder is full, if you need to put on a jumper because you are cold, and various other things that your body will tell you from the inside out and expect you to make an appropriate response. So as I mentioned, we are receiving this information through our senses. We then have to organize and process this information and work out what to do with it. And then we use our body to actually respond and interact with the environment. Now, individuals with Fragile X typically have sensory processing challenges in that they are receiving the information through their senses, but they're not always getting the correct interpretation and organization of this information in the brain. So their interaction with the environment is not always appropriate. And we often have individuals who do not sense temperature correctly. So even in freezing cold weather, they are wearing shorts and t-shirts and they don't want to wear any other clothing. And by trying to work on improving their sensory processing, we can see changes in that they suddenly start wearing winter clothes in winter. They're suddenly becoming more aware of their movements in space. They become less sensitive to certain textures, and that means that their sensory processing is improving. So, onto the topic of tonight's discussion, sensory diets. Why do we do them? When do we do them? Where do we do them? How do we do them? And who is going to do the sensory diet for us? So firstly, what is a sensory diet? It's a personalized plan of sensory activities designed to help individuals to better regulate their sensory systems and improve attention and focus. It's a structured approach and gives the right amount, the right type of sensory input at various times throughout the day. In recent research, a study was done showing that these individually tailored sensory diets are an effective way to enable a child's occupation in daily living activities, whether it be social interactions, activities of daily living, education, or leisure activities. And what we try and do is give people sensory diets, whether it be parents, school staff, daycare centers, houses for supported living, where they can actually help the individual with providing appropriate sensory inputs so that they can be their best selves. So the who now. Who is going to create the sensory diet? I am definitely not recommending that any parent goes out there and attempts to create a sensory diet. I'm giving a very brief overview of creating sensory diets, but there's a lot more that goes into it. We need to make sure that the stimuli that we are giving somebody in a sensory diet are actually the appropriate stimuli. So, for example, something like swinging can both be alerting and it can be calming. So if somebody is swinging really fast on a swing and in quite a haphazard, jerky manner, this would be quite alerting. This might be used in the morning to wake up your nervous system and get you ready for the day. Later in the day, when you need to sort of calm that nervous system, you may be doing slow, gentle, rhythmic swinging, which then calms the nervous system. So it's important that you know how to apply the correct sensory inputs to achieve the correct outputs. So I said that the sensory diet is a schedule, and when are we going to do it? We're actually going to do it throughout the entire day, and it's broken up like a diet that you would take in food. Now we're taking in sensory input. So we usually actually align it with the meal time. So usually we talk about 3 sensory meals, being in the morning, at lunchtime, and then sometime in the late afternoon. And then sensory snacks in between, which provide almost a boost to people so that they can then stay in that calm and organized state. A sensory diet is very prescriptive with targeted specific activities to be done at different times of the day. So for example, in the morning, we would want alerting and whole body big activities, whereas at nighttime, we actually want to calm down that whole sensory system as we prepare to go to sleep. So we will want more gentle, calming type activities. It needs to be personalized so that those activities do those specific things for that individual. So if anybody saw my post on Instagram through the Fragile X Association, where I had all my sensory tubs out yesterday, I'm going to refer to the one with the little water beads we call Orbeez. Some children or individuals find it incredibly calming to rake their hands through the Orbeez or to squish the Orbeez. And others who have tactile defensiveness don't want to go near the Orbeez and would actually not want this as part of their diet, because this would make them go into a state of hyperarousal. They are feeling threatened and they don't like this type of stimuli. So we need to make sure that we're giving people the right type of stimuli. And then we also need to modify as needed. As the individual gets better at using their sensory system, as therapy starts to help with sensory processing, we might need to change those activities. We might need to change when in the day the activities are provided or the type of activities that are provided. And then we also need to bear in mind that we are human beings. Nobody is static. Nobody stays the same. We all change. So we may need to change the types of activities that were of interest to someone and are no longer of interest, or as they get older and they're no longer appropriate. We need to ensure that the activities are also appropriate in terms of developmental level. So that is the person's developmental level as well as their chronological level. So while it might be developmentally appropriate for somebody with Fragile X who is 30 years old to be jumping on a trampoline, is it chronologically appropriate for them to be going to a trampolining center and jumping with all the children? And these are just some of the things that we need to bear in mind. Sensory diets are generally a proactive strategy, and what we want to do is feed the need and provide sensory input to the individual at various times throughout the day so that they are not fidgeting or moving around inappropriately. So often there's something upon waking, depending if your individual jumps out of bed or if they need a little bit of a boost to get out of bed, there may be different activities for them there. This sensory diet belongs to a 7-year-old boy that I saw. He then did some jumping on the trampoline for 2 to 3 minutes. And I feel that it's often good to give a few choices, 2 or 3 choices for each sensory meal, just to give the individual the power of choice and for them to feel like they're in control. We also create the sensory diet in conjunction with the parents, the teachers, and the individual to ensure that they actually can do those sensory activities and that they have the desired outcomes, whether it be providing sensory input or calming for that particular time of day. So this little guy was doing some jumping on the trampoline for 2 to 3 minutes. He was then doing animal walks, which were supported by picture cards of the animal walks, and he selected to do again 2 or 3 of those animal walks. Or the 7-minute HIIT workout for kids, which is available on YouTube. It's a great resource, and children actually do it with the YouTube channel, and it's sort of then done together with someone, so we don't have to have a parent sort of monitoring what they're doing. It's very motivating as well. After breakfast, this little guy was brushing his teeth using an electric toothbrush, which provides vibratory input. Then he would go to school, do whatever he needed to, and as part of his sensory diet, also carry his backpack to school. We're sometimes advocating putting a full or extra drink bottle in there so that it is weighted and it can provide deep pressure input so that the child has a better idea of where their body is in space. He would then do his morning learning, and mid-morning he would have some TheraBand activities. Then at lunchtime, he would be out on the playground. And I guess this is where sensory diets for school and home can sometimes be quite different. At school, there's a set lunch play where the children go out and play. And as long as they are doing some kind of whole body movements and moving about, they are getting a good sensory meal. And on weekends and school holidays, we have to factor in with parents to ensure that they get that lunchtime sensory input dose. Then he would go back into the classroom, have his afternoon learning session, and then come home once again carrying that backpack for further sensory input and have a tug of war with siblings, go scootering around the block, playing any type of after-school sport can be included in this. And then it's dinner time. So now we start to use more calming activities, things that are going to start to prepare the nervous system for bedtime and for a sleep-like state. So before dinner, it was wheelbarrow walks, which give deep pressure input and are calming, as well as that inverted position being calming with the head down. And then delivering washing, again, carrying weight around. Then I generally try and find out what the family's bedtime routine is for the child and ensure that all the different sensory inputs are conducive to calming down the nervous system, whether it be reading a book, having a chat, making a worry list to get rid of worries for the day, or a massage with essential oils, having dim lighting, listening to music, whatever works for that individual. We then sometimes need to have reactive parts to our sensory diet. And this is when the individual requires additional sensory input at a particular time that's not factored into the usual diet. So if they're getting out of the car, we may say, oh, we can see that they just need some more deep pressure right now, and use marching, using big arm and leg movements and heavy stomps to do this. If they're waking up lethargic, and this may not be an everyday occurrence that they wake up lethargic, but the sensory diet needs a little bit of flexibility and a little bit of understanding around the types of inputs. If they cannot get out of bed, we might put on some vibey music and have a dance party. So these are now activities that are activating. These are movement activities. And in the sensory diet, in the sensory meals, we try to provide whole body movements that provide lots of sensory input. So things like jumping on a trampoline, animal walks, playing sport, going to the park, dancing, walking up and down a flight of stairs, wheelbarrow walks, stomping, marching, and one of my favorites, crash and burn, where the child runs and crashes onto a crash mat or a large beanbag. Then on the other side of the continuum, we have big body movements, but these are generally calming and they're not always administered by the Fragile X individual. So they are typically, the individual is there and part of the movement, but they're not using their bodies to initiate those movements. So things like a swing, where we have slow, rhythmic, linear swinging, which is calming, whereas fast, erratic swinging can be excitatory, and that's where it's really important that your OT understands how different types of sensory input affect that individual before prescribing the sensory diet. A rocking chair or rocker is a nice calming activity, and then there are various different activities you can do with a therapy ball, which we will discuss a little bit more in depth later, prescribed by your therapist. Deep pressure or proprioception gives lots of information to the body, and this is through the muscles and joints. And these are also very organizing. So proprioceptive input is organizing. So whether it's swaddling, giving a big hug or wrapping in blankets, having pillows to wrestle or nestle in, using weighted items, or using a therapy ball as seen here to make a pizza, a burrito, cookie dough, or use it as a steamroller. There are lots of different options. Further types of deep pressure input can also be provided throughout the day in various ways by wearing things such as pressure garments. And the range of pressure garments has increased extensively over the last few years. There are tops, there are pants, there are singlets, there are shorts, there are socks, there are beanie type head coverings. So there are so many different types of pressure garments. Compression sheets provide deep pressure input, which may help an individual to stay asleep during the night or to get to sleep. They may want to be wedged into a barrel or tight spaces with pillows to get that deep pressure into the body. And there is also a body sock. And then there is a TheraPressure technique or Wilbarger protocol, which OTs can teach you using a specific TheraPressure brush, which is very calming, it is slow, and it is rhythmic in nature. Then we go on to heavy work, where the child or the individual is doing active work to give lots of input into the muscles and joints through pushing, pulling, lifting, carrying, and working. And think about things that can be incorporated into your daily routine. So things like vacuuming, sweeping, mowing the lawn, carrying a load of laundry. I had a young man attending a daycare center recently, and his job at the end of the day to give him heavy work before he got on the bus to go home was to stack all the chairs at the daycare center. So sometimes we just need to sort of see what is in the environment, what can we practically use as part of our sensory diet. Things like pushing a shopping trolley, pulling a wagon, riding a bike. There we have the stacking chairs. I was actually at school today and trying to show the staff how to implement a sensory diet with a young boy, I see Mikey. And they were doing rotations in the classroom. And after all these rotations, everybody went to sit on the carpet and they were watching something that was being shown on the whiteboard. And it was very loud. And Mikey suddenly started to get very loud. And the teacher said, you see, he just gets out of control at these times. And I said to her, he's getting loud because that noise is very loud and he's co-regulating with it. We need to give Mikey something to calm him down. What do you have? And she actually saves the children to work on laminated sheets with a whiteboard marker. She said she actually saves those and she got them out for Mikey and he cleaned them, and just cleaning and that deep pressure, and he was really leaning into it, just helped to calm him down. So there's a reactive strategy which he needed at that particular time. He had been great until that point, and then he needed something further in his sensory diet. There's also things like push-ups or push-ups against a wall, or I've actually asked a lot of individuals to do chair push-ups where you hold the sides of your chair and you push up in a more discreet kind of way, but it also gives good heavy pressure through the body. Things like sandpit play, as we can see here, is also great heavy work. Climbing at the park, resistance, and then TheraBand around a desk. Now, in order to maintain regulation, we have our sensory diet with our sensory meals and our sensory snacks. And sometimes we need to add in some of those reactive strategies to maintain that level of regulation. You see at the top here, Mikey had a piece of this on his chair today and he kicked against it. His teacher told me he wasn't going to use it, and I actually got another piece of resistance band, which I found on a windowsill in the classroom, put it on one of his peers' chairs, and the peer I could see was fidgeting under the table. He began kicking against it, and we showed Mikey that the peer was doing it, and suddenly he was doing it too. So we also have to be mindful that in a classroom, we don't want to single out children. We want to include them in things, and sometimes parts or all of the sensory diet need to be carried out with the whole class or with a group of children in the class so that they are inclusive. And I often say to teachers, what we're doing with one individual in your class is going to benefit many of the other individuals too. Things like doodling, therapatty, a move-in sit cushion such as you see here, various fidget toys, and sitting on a chair that provides movement, or something like a Swiss ball. Vibration is something not often used in sensory diets. For some individuals, they don't like it at all. For others, it really is a good thing to have. And I have found that a lot of them respond really well to electric toothbrushes and to using some kind of vibrating whistle, like a kazoo or a harmonica. Another one of the senses we use a lot, and particularly with those sensory snacks, is putting things into our mouth, so oral input. Lots of crunchy foods, apples, pears, carrots, celery, dry cereal, nuts, pretzels, rice crackers, corn thins. There are so many different types of oral input that we can give to just have as a sensory snack. Then things like Hubba Bubba chewing gum, where the child is constantly using deep pressure. Some schools are opposed to this. I found this works particularly well in daycare center, activity centers, where people are expected to do certain work. It just helps to keep them regulated. Icy poles, the sucking and the coldness of those icy poles. Or in our practice, we actually have an ice crusher, and we constantly have ice, and we crush it and then get the children to suck it, which provides super oral input. The other thing I really like using is the Camelback water bottle. It has a very thick straw, and that provides resistance, and then it also indirectly provides deep breathing, and that can be very calming as a reactive sensory strategy, similar to the production of bubbles. We also have breathing cards where individuals can breathe, and we can do a quick breathing exercise if everybody is game. So if everybody just wants to put up their hand, and then we can start at the bottom of the thumb, go up the thumb, breathing in, and then breathe out. Breathe in, and then breathe out. Breathe in, and then breathe out. Breathe in, and then breathe out, breathe in, and then breathe out. There are a few different breathing cards I'm going to show here, and different individuals like different breathing cards. And these are great if you just cut them out, laminate them. You can follow them with your finger. You can draw arrows on them. And they're a great thing to have in a sensory backpack that you can have when you go out. So there's just another one or two. Then the auditory system is very powerful, especially in calming. So rhythmic music is calming. Some of our older Fragile X, well, not older adults, some of our adults who have Fragile X enjoy things like nursery rhymes, and they find them to be calming too. So sometimes songs help to do things, and I often sing in my therapy sessions to help regulate the children and to keep them calm, especially when they're trying out things that they've never done before, which is quite threatening for Fragile X individuals, or things that are extending their capabilities and slightly out of their comfort zone. Lots of active participation. So drumming is really another great type of sensory input. And there we'd be getting the deep pressure, the vibration, and the auditory input at once. So it's fantastic. Environmental sounds are often very calming. Those nature sounds, the sea sounds, the forest sounds. And the easy thing with the auditory input is that everybody has got a radio, CD player, access to Spotify in their car. They're often easy. And then we can have a selected playlist. And some of my clients have two different playlists. So one of alerting music, another one of calming music. Then I have some who just want what they call favorite music, and they select to use that music at certain times. The visual system is the sensory system that we are very reliant on most of our day. And it also can be easily overwhelmed, and we may sometimes need things to calm the auditory system, such as lava lamps, oil and water distractors. This is a bubble tube over here, or pendulums, which have that sort of memorizing side-to-side swing. The olfactory system, not used as much as the others, but some individuals may find mum's perfume or deodorant on a handkerchief to be comforting. And sometimes we use things like lavender oil at the end of a day as part of the calm down in our sensory diet. I'm going to talk a bit about this emergency backpack over here. This emergency backpack is a crucial part of the sensory diet. It's going to have lots of different sensory things in it. And these are things that are going to go with you into the community. So I say to parents that every individual with Fragile X should have an emergency backpack. The emergency backpack is, again, very personalized. It's things that help them to calm down. So we're not using the emergency backpack as excitatory or big sensory input whole body movements. We're putting lots of little things in there that target one single sensory system. I always say have some dried snacks, so things like pretzels, dry cereals, crackers, jerky, that type of thing, sometimes chewing gum, so that you can get that deep pressure input through the jaw. We may also want some of those olfactory things in there, the calming ones for that individual. Over here, you can see there are some of these little visual distractors. Then we also want some tactile things, whether they be fidgety things where we're using the fingers, or things that require deep pressure, such as stress balls, therapy, Play-Doh. We sometimes talk about a bob inside this emergency backpack, which is a biting options box, which contains all those food type snacks, as well as some of those chewies, which they often wear around their neck, and they may just need to bite it. Also, sometimes when they become dysregulated, to get rid of frustrations. Also, carrying this, again, you can put one of those Camelback drink bottles in there with that straw. Or if you're going on an outing, put in a yogurt with a thick straw, and that sucking is also very calming, sucking yogurt through a thick straw. These sensory backpacks are generally pretty heavy, so for the individual with Fragile X to actually carry that backpack is very beneficial because it provides that deep pressure input. I had a young man with Fragile X a few years ago, and he was catching public transport to and from his daycare program with a support worker. But he said that when he got anxious, he had a vibrating pillow in there, and he just used to turn the pillow on and lean against. He had put his backpack behind him and lean against it, and that for him was very calming. Now, individuals with Fragile X typically have sensory processing challenges. And if we think how hard they have to work each day just to do what neurotypical people are doing by having these sensory diets and having these additional inputs and accommodations, we sort of sometimes forget what a toll it takes on them. And I do recommend that for every individual with Fragile X, whether they're going to school, to a day program, whatever activities they're doing in that day, they need to have various withdrawal areas at their disposal. So whether they have a separate room or something in a kitchen at a daycare program, if they have just an area between classrooms, as at one school they had a withdrawal area and that they could sit under the desk between the classrooms, or if they have something like the sensory tent pictured on the right here, they need something that when there is too much sensory input, and we've been discussing various types of sensory input today, and we're now going to the other extreme, they have a place to de-stress, to get away from all the sensory inputs and to calm their nervous system. So the withdrawal area needs to be in a quiet area, and outdoors is not appropriate. It needs to be easily accessible, provide a feeling of containment and security, and it needs to be seen as that individual's special area, definitely not a punishment. We're not punishing them by sending them there. We're using another proactive strategy, sending them to the withdrawal area so that they can regulate their nervous system. And it should be filled with individualized calming items for that individual. A book is typically a good calming one. Things like TheraBand, Therapathy, headphones, music, those types of things are all important to have in the withdrawal area. And we typically send the individual there for 3 to 5 minutes. Sometimes they need a bit longer to go and to regulate. I see a little boy who is 4 years old, and last year he was having lots of meltdowns at home. And what his mum realized, she was giving him great sensory input and following the diet really well, but at times he was just going into sensory overload. So in the December holiday, she went and purchased the sensory tent that I had suggested, and she got him lots of things that he really loved, some coloring and drawing, books. He had Play-Doh in there. He had some musical instruments. He had his favorite teddy in there. And she came to me in January and she said, this has been a game changer for my family because he goes to that area. And she said at the age of 4, he was actually recognizing that things were all getting too much for him, and he'd start to take himself into that area before things got out of control. And I'm going to say we had about 4 months with no meltdowns. We had a few meltdowns last week, but hopefully we'll be back on track. There's also in some of the daycare programs and at certain schools, they are setting up sensory rooms where they have lots of different items which can help when individuals with Fragile X are going into sensory overload. Again, you just need to check which ones do work for your individual. And I've just put here a picture. This is a projector of lights or soft images. They are beautiful. You get all different ones. This is the marine one. You get space ones, and they're really inexpensive if a school is looking at buying a few things that will work for lots of individuals and that are not expensive. Bean bags to recline in, cushions that just give you that feeling of protection and security. And then these jelly cubes are also quite new, and they are really great to give deep pressure into the hands. Then it's great to have sensory bins, but one just needs to be careful to ensure whether those things in the bins are excitatory or calming. And just to be careful, some children will see a bin full of rice and rice is going all over and we have a big mess to clean. That is not an appropriate sensory input for that individual, but there are lots of other different options. The Temple Grandin Hug Machine is another one. It's quite a pricey thing. Some families have purchased them and some schools have purchased them. It's also known as a sausage machine, and there are big rollers, and you slide in between the big rollers. I know a few of my therapists at work sometimes say, can you just help me get in there? There is one in particular who used to go in that machine almost every day. We've now reduced it to about once or twice a week when she's feeling a little bit stressed. Then there's lots of community-based activities, and that's why it's really important when the OT is designing the sensory diet to find out what the family does each day and what type of lifestyle they have, and to incorporate as many activities that the child would enjoy engaging in as part of that sensory diet. So hippotherapy, which is horseback riding, which has an amazing vestibular input for child, as well as forming that relationship with the animal. Things like swimming, great sensory input for some, not for others. Yoga, gym, martial arts. And then look at the types of things that they're doing in their home anyway. We have one family that every single Saturday they do baking as their sort of deep pressure sensory input. See if they can help with yard work. There is another young boy who I'm going to show you as my last slide. And one of his sensory input activities at school is rounding up the chooks every day after recess. He rounds up the chooks and takes them back into the chook house. So the teacher there is really thinking of what kind of activities need to be done. He is also known as the recycler. He goes around to all the classrooms with a cart and a buddy, and they collect the recycling, lots of deep pressure input, and take it to the recycling bin. I've just put a few of the places where you can purchase some of these sensory ideas that I've mentioned. They are all available online. The range of pressure garments, as I said, has increased a lot. And the two main suppliers we use are Jet Proof or OT Warehouse. And these garments are typically worn under clothing, as you can see this young boy here. And then it just becomes part of when they get dressed, they wear that garment every day. These are all different places to purchase the sensory things from. I'm going to say places like Kmart have got huge sensory ranges and they're really capitalizing on things like fidget toys at the moment. Unfortunately, they don't last particularly well, but sometimes when you need those sensory items in various locations, it's a great place to go. And then I've also put Heart for therapy balls, just because the quality of their therapy balls is excellent. Try and make sure the therapy balls are firm when you use them. A saggy therapy ball doesn't give nearly as much sensory input as a firm one.
Thank you, Bev.